This is that 66 Super Reverb that I thought was done, but when I put it back into its cabinet, it started getting noisy, and the noise was on the normal channel. If I bring up the volume of the vibrato channel, normal background noise in an unshielded cab. You can hear that stuff as I move my hand along the chassis. It does weird capacitance things. So it's not in the normal channel. I'm sorry, it's not in the vibrato channel. It's definitely in the normal channel. You can hear that. And we usually call that a rushing water noise. There are a couple places it could come from. It could come from either grid. It could come from the grid going to V1A, or it could come from the grid off the volume pot coming to V1B. Given that it's affected by the volume of the normal channel, though it's still there with the volume at 0, it's not as bad. It tells me it's most likely in V1B. Now, at this point, it could be the grid leak from the volume wiper to ground. That measures good. It could be the cathode, but the cathode of V1B is shared with V2B. And so if that were a noisy cathode resistor, this one right here, it'd be on both channels. So that tells me I need to look at the plate resistor. And this is one of the original carbon comps from 1966. And so are the ones on the vibrato channel. The ones on the vibrato channel are fine. I suspect that resistor right there is the source of our noise. So I'm going to go ahead and change this one and this one while I'm in there for the exact same type, exact same tolerance, and see if that rushing water noise goes away. There's no DC on the board. There's no DC on this side of this cap. There's no DC on the tone stack caps. I think we're just good old-fashioned noisy resistor city. Okay, I've got all three resistors out, the 2 plates and the slope resistor in the tone stack, because it has a lot of voltage on it as well. And that could be contributing to the problem. Shut up, meter. Got the components out, and I've got all the old solder out. And the reason I do that is primarily because I don't want to just add a whole bunch of solder to the existing solder. Then you have pools beneath the board, and this blob could connect to any blob here. The previous tech didn't do the neatest job in the world along those lines. I mean, it's functional. It's not pretty. You can compare it to my after here. I'm not going to redo everything in this amp. I mean, there has to be a budgetary consideration. If the work is not beautiful, but it's fine, I'm not going to change it. But the work I'm about to do, I hope, is beautiful as well. So let me put those components in place. Okay, 3 new 100K half-watt carbon composites in place. Same tolerance as the originals. Here's the 2 originals. I tried to replicate the domed look of the original solder joints as much as possible. The reason the boards on these old Fenders have this domed look is they applied the solder from the back. They had the whole thing upside down and soldered from the rear, and so all the excess domed up on the other side like that. And it's hard to get that when you work from the top side, but I've got a method that gets me pretty close. It's not necessary, but it's a lot prettier than this work here from the previous guy. Technically, this is too much solder in all the original joints per NASA spec. But this is not going to the moon, and it's the look. So I try to replicate the original look when it doesn't hurt. And now still got a little rushing water. So I know it's not that. The remaining thing it could be is a noisy mix resistor here. These two 220Ks. This is the one that mixes in the normal channel. This is the one that mixes in the vibrato reverb channel. So it's possible that this is a source of the remaining rushing water noise, though it is less than it was. So it's not always just one resistor in these things. It can be multiple points with similar failures. So this definitely lowered the rushing water, but hasn't eliminated it yet. Let's see what doing those two resistors does for us. Okay, two new 220K mixed resistors later. The rest of that rushing water noise is gone. There's different rushing water noise in the background because my wife is running a bath in the bathroom next door, and it's going to take forever because we have almost no water pressure due to the winter storm, which has hit Memphis very hard. We had about 7 inches of snow, which is about 6.5 inches more than we usually get. And the city pipes are not loving it. That noise, as I turn the volumes up and down, where it gets buzzier in the middle, then gets quieter at the tops and bottoms of the range, it's because my hand was close to the circuit and it's not shielded. That's just a capacitance thing you learn to work around when you have an amp running on the bench. But this amp sounds a lot better without that constant yucky noise. There's still a little tiny bit of noise in the pot in its bottom range. That's just an old pot, but it's not bad, so I'm gonna leave it be. In this, with an amp that's 55 years old, there's always a question of how much to change. How perfect does it need to be? I'm not going to worry about that volume pot. One thing I forgot to mention before is on this new 100K slope resistor, I've got it elevated slightly above the board with a little bit of excess on the leads. Now, yes, I'm totally capable of doing it flat to the board like this original one. But what happens is these boards flex, they warp over time. And when that happens, the resistors, which are mounted horizontally, very commonly pull out of their solder joints. And so by putting a little bit of slack in the leads, that means as the board moves, the resistor is able to flex a little bit rather than pulling out. This one's not pulled out. The big culprit in all Fenders is this resistor from the end of the tail resistor in the cathode to ground. In the 6L6 amps, it's a 100 ohm, and in the 6V6 amps, it's a 47 ohm. This very commonly pulls out. In fact, on this amp, I remember that this end had pulled out of here. It had enough excess lead that I was able to resolder it. But on these horizontally mounted resistors, I'm intentionally not doing it just like they did at the factory because it doesn't last as well long term as giving it just the slightest bit of excess.